Hello everybody, my name is Jared and today we are going to be working on the last bit of the Bakugou work log. So we're going to be working on the Yukata and finishing off the last bits of that costume, so stay tuned and we will get on with that. Go!
Okay, first of all we're going to be working on the stomach wrap. This has a little bow attached to the back of it and long strings. It's just going to sit around the waist of the Yukata that we've made. I made the pattern by wrapping masking tape around the middle of my Bakugou cosplay and then cutting in the seam of where I want the actual bow to close. My seam is going to be hidden by the bow in the back. Then I took the tape off of the person, stuck it down on paper, added an extra ½ inch seam allowance around all of the edges and then added an extra inch on either side of the closure. And that's just because I'm going to have it closed with Velcro. I then folded over all of the edges twice to create a clean edge and sewed it down. I also added stiffener in this stage as well and to the front and back panels. Then I cut several 2-inch wide strips of the same fabric, hemmed them in the same way. I then pinned these down onto my base fabric, so onto the little bodice that we've made already, and I tried to lay these out as naturally as I could to make them look like they were just strips of fabric wrapped around the torso. I did this instead of just wrapping pieces of fabric around him on the day because it would be easier to put on, and it's more consistent in photographs. Once I was happy with the layout, I sewed all of these down. And then I added the Velcro for the closure. For the bow, I cut 2 large squares of fabric, sewed them all around the edges together, and left about 2 inches of gap so that when it was finished sewing all the edges, I could actually turn it inside out, putting all of the seams on the inside so you don't have to actually see them. I then fed wire into the edges of the bow, sewing a 1 cm wide channel to hold the wire in place. This gave my bow a spiky, shaped effect so that I could actually make it look however I wanted and fold it into shape. I then took hold of the bow in the middle, crushed it together, and then took one of my hemmed strips from the bodice and secured it around by wrapping it around the middle of the bow and sewing it shut. Then I cut 2 6-inch wide strips the length of 3 foot each and folded them in the middle lengthways and sewed them the same way as the bow, so turning them inside out so the hems were on the inside. I then pressed these shut and sewed over the edges of all of them to give them a really clean edge. I then took these strips and sewed them into the back of the bow at the joining seam and then hand sewed those onto the bodice. I then detailed this wrap with hand sewing gold beads along the top row of the bodice and the bow edges. Now we'll move on to making the wolf mask. First, I took a base cat mask from Hobbycraft. I drafted wolf ears, a muzzle and cheek fluffs from craft foam and attached them with hot glue. I also then shaped them a little bit with heat. I wrapped the whole mask in Warbler. I used Warbler Black for this because it gives a smoother texture afterwards, and I used as big pieces as I could to minimise the seams being visible when I was finished. I pressed it into shape with my fingers, and I did the same to smooth out seams. I will say as well, please be careful if you are going to do this with your fingers, not to burn yourself. My fingers are completely used to being pressed against boiling hot things. I'm a cosplayer, I've been cosplaying a while. I then primed it with Mod Podge 3 times. I painted it white 2 times. And then I followed the design to paint the features onto the mask. I was very careful to keep everything symmetrical, and I tried to use colours that weren't going to be super bright and in your face and distracting from the rest of the costume. I then also shaded a little bit of black into the ears to create more depth and give it a little bit of a gradient. I then created the flower things for the side of the mask. I took red cord, used a little bit of hot glue to keep it in shape, and rolled it into a snail shell shape. Ooh, that's hard to say. Snail shell shape. Then I looped it to create petals, securing it in place again with hot glue. I created 2 of these, attached tassels onto them, and I made string ties from the same cord to tie around the back of the mask and actually hold it onto your head. Now we're going to move on to the last part, the armbands, and these are asymmetrical, so one is different from the other one. I made the longer sleeve by wrapping black spandex around the arm, pinning it in place and then cutting it with seam allowance. Then I cut off the areas that are going to be in orange, with a little bit of seam allowance left on again, and then used those as a pattern to create the orange sections. So I just cut those black bits that I just cut off out in orange with added seam allowances. I sewed all of these pieces together with a zigzag stitch to allow it to stretch, and then I hemmed them. I repeated this technique to make a mini version for the other arm. I then cut out a rectangle of black fabric, the same fabric I used for the yukata, sewed it together to make a short tube, and then hemmed it and sewed on what I had left of the ribbon from the previous sleeve part of the yukata. I added some final touches like a bead string and a tail, and then this is the finished Bakugou costume. Yay!
So that's me just closing off the last bits of the work log from the Yukata version of Bakugou Katsuki. I hope you guys have liked this. It's obviously a really informal video, and it's just sort of talking you through the process of how I work on my cosplay costumes. I'm going to hopefully do more of these as well, so if you do like them, make sure you let me know, and let me know what stuff works and what stuff doesn't, because I would like to be able to improve them in the future. So thank you very, very much for watching, and as always, please remember to be creepy.